One moment. Okay, we should be good to go now.
All right, good afternoon and welcome. This is a remote meeting of the Energy Facilities Siting Board regarding 2 agenda items. The first is a decision on Eversource's proposed Andrews Square to Dewar Street Transmission Reliability Project docket number EFSB 19-03/DPU 19-15. And the second is to consider initiating a notice of inquiry by the Energy Facilities Siting Board on its own motion into procedures for enhancing public awareness of and participation in its proceedings. My name is Katie Theoharides. I'm the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the Chair of the Energy Facilities Siting Board. With me today are other members of the Siting Board who I will introduce in a moment. Before we begin, I do want to provide some basic instructions on how to best use Zoom for today's meeting. We have interpreters who will be translating to and from English, Spanish, Chinese, and Vietnamese. To select your desired language, click on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen and select a language so that you can hear everything said tonight with interpretation as needed today. Please do not check the box that says mute original audio. We recommend this so that you can still hear the voice of the actual speaker faintly in the background, but mostly you will hear the voice of the interpreter. Dial-in participants will hear the speaker's voice without interpretation. However, comments made by dial-in participants will be interpreted. I'll ask the interpreters to provide these instructions before we continue: Spanish, then Chinese, then Vietnamese, and I'll give you a moment to adjust your language settings. Thank you.
Okay, we'll begin with the Chinese instructions in Chinese, please. 'Thank you. Can we have the Spanish interpreter, Margot, please provide instructions? Not hearing her.
ATN, can you switch to English and do the translation? Margot has been dropped off.
Thank you. And the Vietnamese interpretation, please. Thank you. We're ready to continue.
So I'll introduce the other members of the EFSB participating in the meeting today. Matthew Nelson, Chair of the Department of Public Utilities, Cecile Frazier, Commissioner of the Department of Public Utilities, Patrick Woodcock, Commissioner of the Department of Energy Resources, Gary Moran, Deputy Commissioner and Designee for the Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Protection, Jonathan Costco, General Counsel and Designee for the Secretary of the Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development, Joseph Bonfiglio, Public Member, and Brian Casey, also a Public Member. And Andy Green, Director of the Siting Board, will be serving as the meeting host, along with other staff of the Siting Board. So before we begin, I will provide some important information about how we will be conducting this meeting today. The Siting Board will be held remotely using Zoom, as we're all here. This meeting is being recorded and will be available on DPU's YouTube channel. The meeting is being held remotely pursuant to the Massachusetts Open Meeting Law, the Siting Board regulations, and recent legislation allowing the continuation of remote open meetings via video conferencing until April 1st of 2022. The purpose of today's board meeting is to listen to comments from participants in the Siting Board proceeding, from public officials, area residents, and other stakeholders joining us on Zoom. After listening to your comments, the board will begin its deliberations on the tentative decision, consider possible amendments to the tentative decision, and finally vote on the tentative decision for the Andrew Square to Dewar Street Transmission Reliability Project. Following the Andrew Dewar project, we have a second item on the agenda for today's meeting, consideration of initiating a notice of inquiry by the Energy Facilities Siting Board regarding procedures for enhancing public awareness of and participation in its proceedings. I'll explain the comment process for that portion of the meeting when we have completed the Andrew Dewar agenda item. Using Zoom, the public will have a full opportunity to see and hear everything said during this remote Siting Board meeting and to offer comments. For those of you accessing the meeting by phone, you will hear everything and have an opportunity to comment as well. The instructions on how to participate were provided in the notice sent to parties and mailed to property owners and all US mailbox addresses within 300 feet of the Andrew Dewar project boundary. In addition, the siting staff sent the notice to various elected officials and community groups in the area of the project. The notice was also posted on the EFSB website and the Eversource website and published in local newspapers serving readers in English, Spanish, Chinese, and Vietnamese. If you are having any difficulties, please call or text 857-200-0065 for assistance at any time during this meeting. Again, that number is 857-200-0065. In conducting the meeting, I want to note some important procedures we will be following. All board members must be audible to each other and to the audience. If a member becomes disconnected at any time, we will note that on the record. And if there are any significant technical difficulties, I will stop the meeting to allow the problem to be resolved. So before we get to the substance of our meeting, let me mention that a stenographer is participating remotely who will transcribe everything said to make an official record of the meeting. Board members and other speakers should mute their audio when listening and unmute when speaking. This is an important reminder for myself as well. Everyone should speak slowly and clearly and allow the speaker to finish before you begin speaking. These procedures will help to ensure an accurate transcript of the meeting. Video recordings in English, Spanish, Chinese, and Vietnamese will also be posted on the Department of Public Utilities YouTube channel included in the notice. First, if you would like to present comments to the Siting Board today, you have hopefully pre-registered as described in the notice. If you would like to speak but have not pre-registered, we will do our best to accommodate you at the appropriate time by using the raise hand icon in Zoom at the bottom of your screen. For those of you dialing in, you can raise your hand and let us know if you would like to comment by dialing *9. Public commenters are asked to keep comments to approximately 3 minutes per person so that we can hear from everyone who wishes to speak. We will gently remind speakers when it's time to wrap up, about 30 seconds before the 3-minute mark, and then at 3 minutes. Mr. Hazel of the Siting Board staff will raise a card, and can you show that card to folks, Mr. Hazel? Thank you. Each public commenter will be provided only one opportunity to comment so that we may hear from everyone. Public officials who comment will have additional time as needed. The Siting Board will listen to presentations from its staff and parties in the proceeding, as well as comments from public officials and the community. Then the board will begin its deliberation and finally vote on the tentative decision. We will take comments in the following order today: first from public officials, then after a presentation on the tentative decision by the presiding officer, we will turn to comments from the interveners and limited participants. And finally, we will turn to comments from members of the public. I will call on public commenters in the order that they have pre-registered. And time permitting, at the end, we will invite additional public commenters who can use the raise hand feature on Zoom or *9 on your phone. We do intend to take a 10-minute break around 2:30 and another at 4 p.m. if needed. In addition, our interpreters will take turns every 30 minutes, and we will pause briefly to let them do so. So moving to the agenda, there are 2 items on the agenda today. The first, as I mentioned, is consideration of the tentative decision in the matter of NSTAR Electric Company doing business as Eversource Energy, EFSB 19-03/DPU 19-15, in which Eversource seeks approval from the Siting Board for an approximately 2-mile long, 115 kilovolt underground transmission line between the company's Andrews Square substation in South Boston and Dewar Street substation in Dorchester, and substation modifications were required to connect that new line. The second agenda item is consideration of initiating a notice of inquiry by the Energy Facilities Siting Board on its own motion into procedures for enhancing public awareness of and participation in its proceedings. Let me begin by calling on officials present who would like to speak regarding the tentative decision. I'll begin with any federal officials present who would like to speak. Do we have any federal officials today?
I don't believe so,
Okay.
Chair, but if there are any officials present, please raise your hand if we've not identified you. I believe that we do have a city official who is attending and has requested to speak as a resident, but I'll just note that she is also a city official, Reverend Mariama White Hammond, who is I see in the group today. So I've moved her to the panel, and perhaps we can take her comments.
Great. Thank you, Chief. Go ahead.
Yes, so I am attending. I am, yes, the Chief of Energy, Environment, and Open Space for the City of Boston. But I am participating as a resident of 62 Romsey Street along one of the proposed alternate routes to the substation. And I just have 3 questions, which is the first is there a need for the transmission lines? And I raise this because I'm aware that sometimes these projects are just proposed, but as a resident, it's very hard to understand why now, et cetera. And it would be very helpful if that kind of information, that kind of presentation existed. This is the first information I got. I started to look online, but it seems hard to formulate any ideas in response when we don't have very much sort of basic information about the project and why it is needed and why it is needed now. So that's the first question. The second I want to ask is if there's a need, and I would love to hear more about that, but is this proposed project taking into account the forecasted need based on new development? There are a number of new projects that are being forecasted in our area. Bay City is one, Dot Block another. There's quite a few. And given that there will be some level of disruption for the insertion of these transmission lines, the question is is this going to happen again in 4 years because it's only based on current need, or is it taking into account potential future need? And I would add another layer to that, potential future need if we move at the level of electrification that we hopefully will be doing in the city and in the state. Because we have the lived experience of feeling like the same hole gets opened 12 times. And if it's going to get opened, could it be opened one time and one time that is doing sufficient work so that it won't need to be, again, accessed in, say, 2 to 3 years from now. And finally, questions about whether or not this is fully taken into account issues of coastal flooding and rainwater challenges, which we currently have. I know this as a resident, but obviously I also kind of know a little bit more because I am also in charge of parks and know about some of the flooding issues that we've had in Moakley, connected with Carson, which are very close both to the proposed route and to the secondary route. I'm assuming that folks in Mary McCormick were also informed. I do have some concerns about sort of how accessible this information was to a resident who doesn't, for her job, understand quite a bit about who the EFSB is and what you do. So I'm more than willing to save those other comments, but I do want to note that 1 o'clock in the middle of the day on a weekday is not a terribly accessible time for most folks who would have jobs in which they would not be given time off in the middle of the day to join a proceeding such as this. And so just wanting to really think about all of my neighbors, some of whom are probably still sitting at home. I mean, I'm now officially back in the office. We do have folks who are at home on Zoom, but we have a lot of neighbors who go into work and for whom this time of the day would not have been an accessible one. And I will reserve any other, I know that our office sent extensive comments to the DPU around some of the conversation it is having around the accessibility of its space. And so I think most of those probably would also apply to EFSB, and we would be more than willing actually to, I'll have my staff separately send them along. It's just in terms of the work that we've done around making our work as accessible as possible. We'd love to be a partner. This is me, not as a resident, me as an official, sort of saying we'd love to partner in thinking about how to make very technical information more accessible to the public. My staff is probably a little upset, or a little, not upset, but concerned. We are now in the process of recruiting an 8th grade class to which we can do our presentations, and they can ding us if they don't actually understand what we're saying, because we believe that if all of my staff can explain what they're doing to a 8th grade class, then we know that they will have the capacity to do the same to the public. But we can partner on those offline. That is all I have to say as I guess a party to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. And I believe that the next section, we can ask our presiding officer to address some of the very good questions you raised as she makes her presentation on the tentative decision. But I think all good questions and subjects for further discussion as we move forward in the meeting today. Are there any other local officials present before we move on to the presentation of the tentative decision? Okay. Then I will ask Presiding Officer Sharkey to present the decision.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Theorides and members of the Siding Board. I am Donna Sharkey, the Presiding Officer for EFSB 1903 EPU 19-15. The consolidated dockets for 2 petitions filed by NSTAR Electric Company, doing business as Eversource Energy, which I will refer to as Eversource of the company, related to its proposal to construct a 2-mile, 115 kV underground transmission line between the company's Andrews Square substation in South Boston and the Dewar Street substation in Dorchester. With me today are other members of the Siting Board staff who are involved in the review of the company's proposed project and the preparation of the tentative decision. Dean Hazel, Assistant Director. John Young, Technical Director. And Dr. Ina Kuman, Siting Analyst. Siting Director Andy Green and Siting General Counsel Joan Foster Evans also participated in the development of this decision. The company proposed this project to address concerns associated with maintaining reliable electric service in South Boston, Roxbury, and Dorchester neighborhoods. Mr. Hazel, if you could bring up the shot. We wanted to offer this map just so you could see the neighborhoods that we're discussing and the relative locations of the two substations. The Andrews Square substation serves approximately 34,000 customers, and Dewar Street serves approximately 58,000. The company's reliability concerns stem from the fact the two substations that serve this area are each supplied by a separate pair of underground, high-pressure, fluid-filled, pipe-type cables that originate at the K Street substation. Under normal conditions, these existing cables provide an adequate supply of electricity to the area and reliable service. The reliability concern in this proceeding arises from the possibility that an inadvertent disruption or accidental damage to either pair of cables, perhaps due to construction work or excavation activity that occurs from time to time in these streets, could damage the cables and curtail the supply of power to either substation. If this contingency were to occur, the loss of power would be quite significant, with up to 58,000 customer accounts and perhaps even more actual people losing electric service. The vulnerabilities of this scenario are compounded by the fact underground cable damage can take a significant amount of time to locate and repair, with the possibility of oil leakage from the affected cables occurring until the problem is located and fixed. In addition, both the Andrews Square and Dewar Street substation are radial facilities, meaning they are located at the end of the Eversource transmission system and are not connected to multiple points on the regional transmission network. This means these substations lack the ability to continue operating in the event of a loss of supply from the K Street substation. In short, there is no backup supply for Andrews Square or Dewar Street substations in the event of a contingency. As noted in the tentative decision, load growth is not a factor driving the need for this project. Rather, it is the existing configuration of radial transmission lines that I just described. In addition, the ability for Eversource to alternatively get power to customers in the area through emergency measures on its lower voltage distribution system is quite limited. Finally, it would be difficult to obtain and connect replacement power sources in response to the emergency situation of a contingency outage, likely requiring disruptive placement, connection, and fueling of many large emergency generators in densely populated neighborhoods. The Siting Board considered alternatives to the project, including energy efficiency, energy storage, solar photovoltaics, distribution improvements, and another transmission approach. However, the tentative decision finds that the project is superior in meeting the identified need with a minimum impact on the environment at the lowest cost. The tentative decision finds that the possibility of losing service in the South Boston, Roxbury, and Dorchester neighborhoods could have severe and unacceptable consequences to public health and safety. This area includes critical community resources such as hospitals and medical facilities, schools, government agencies, correctional facilities, police and fire facilities, public housing developments, and large commercial sites. The tentative decision finds that the proposed project would provide an effective solution to this reliability risk. The project would provide a direct transmission link between the Andrews Square station and the Dewar Street station, allowing these two substations to provide backup supply to each other in the event that the existing supply cables are disrupted. In addition, Eversource will perform certain upgrades at both substations needed to connect the new line. The project would effectively provide a power loop between the K Street, Andrews Square, and Dewar Street substation, providing for much improved reliability than the current dead-end system configuration. In addition, this new cable link would employ modern cross-linked polyethylene cable installed in a duct bank surrounded by thermal concrete for added protection. There would be no insulating oil in the new cable and thus no risk of oil leakage. The visual impacts of the project are primarily temporary during construction of the underground line. The work associated with equipment upgrades at the two substations will not significantly change the existing substation's visual impacts once completed. The tentative decision finds the project would, on balance, contribute to a reliable energy supply for the Commonwealth with a minimum impact on the environment at the lowest possible cost, and recommends approval of the Eversource project as proposed with certain conditions. Once Eversource determined that it needed an additional line between the Andrews Square and Dewar Street substations, the company assessed routing options within the South Boston Dorchester neighborhood and considered multiple factors to choose its preferred route, including the use of existing linear corridors such as I-93 and the MBTA right-of-way. Based on its review, the company selected the two final candidate routes of Morrissey Boulevard, which is its preferred route, and Sydney Street, its noticed alternative route. These two final routes are close in both length, 2.0 miles versus 1.6 miles, and cost, $68.3 million versus $69.6 million. The preferred route avoids Coast Coast Circle, which is a key concern of the Boston Planning and Development Agency. Both routes require crossing I-93 and the MBTA tracks. The Morrissey Boulevard route offers more flexibility than the Sydney Street route due to the greater width of that roadway, easier means of addressing traffic management, and fewer abutting residences. There are two major redevelopment projects planned in the vicinity of the proposed project: the Mary McCormick Housing Community Redevelopment and the reconstruction of Morrissey Boulevard. Eversource is seeking to coordinate design and construction of the Andrew Dewar line in connection with these other major construction projects in the area. By doing so, it hopes to further reduce the overall net impacts to area residents and the general public. The choice of route, construction delays, and potential neighborhood disruption associated with construction were the primary concerns expressed by residents at the initial public comment hearing held in June 2019. DCR, Mass DOT, the MBTA, and the city all will review the traffic management plans prepared by Eversource for construction of the project. The TD directs Eversource to publish construction information on its project website so that residents have access to traffic-related plans as construction progresses. The TD also requires comprehensive outreach plans that will provide residents with information on complaint and response procedures and protocols to notify local schools of upcoming construction. The TD includes a requirement that the company coordinate with Boston Water and Sewer Commission when constructing near water and sewer underground utilities. The TD also includes construction hour restrictions in residential areas to limit noise impacts, requiring the use of lower noise equipment and portable noise barriers during nighttime cable splicing activities. Finally, the TD includes other conditions designed to protect recreational activities near McConnell Park. We note the city is redesigning McConnell Park, which is presently under reconstruction. Although the primary route also passes through that area, those construction activities going now are not part of Eversource's proposed project. I would like to note that both routes involve locations with environmental justice populations. However, only a portion of the preferred route is in the EJ population areas. Almost all of the noticed alternative route is in EJ areas. In addition, the City of Boston Neighborhood Services Office indicated to Eversource that residents along Sydney Street, the noticed alternative route, have experienced heavy construction activities and disruption over the past few years from other projects. To ensure that residents of the area had notice of this board meeting, consistent with the language access policy established in 2015, we analyzed the census data for languages spoken in the area of the project. The siting board then required translation of the notice and publication of the notice in English, Chinese, Vietnamese, and Spanish newspapers. We also required the company to provide the translated notices and are providing simultaneous interpreters at this board meeting. We provided broader notice in this proceeding by requiring that the company provide the translated notice for the public comment hearing and this board meeting to all addresses, including approximately 6,300 addresses near the two noticed routes and the substations. Such notices have always been provided in the past to neighboring property owners, but we expanded notice in recognition that the area residents of rental properties should have an opportunity to comment on issues affecting their neighborhood. Finally, I'd like to bring the board's attention to some limited amendments to the tentative decision set forth on the amendment sheets that have been provided to you. These amendments generally correct minor edits. In addition, as the company noted, there were certain numerical errors appearing in Table 4 at page 50 of the tentative decision. When transferring numbers from the original exhibit into the table included in the decision, we changed the format of the table and inadvertently transposed some numbers. We believe that with the implementation of the conditions that we have included in the tentative decision to reduce impacts to residents and the environment, that the company's project would on balance contribute to a reliable energy supply for the Commonwealth with a minimum impact on the environment at the lowest possible cost. Staff recommends that the siting board approve the project and adopt the tentative decision before you. Staff would be happy to answer any questions either now or after other comments have been presented. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sharkey. Does the board have any questions for Ms. Sharkey or other siting board staff at this time? I will start off with one, Ms. Sharkey, going back to Reverend White-Hammond's question about future need and projections that might start to get into looking at electrification and development. Does this siting decision take those factors into account and does it help ensure reliable service as our electrification goes up?
The company provided information that we had requested about load forecasts for the different substations. And based on the forecast provided in the record, there was not appreciable load forecast growth anticipated by the company. The real reason is not load growth per se, but the ability to protect by running a new line in a hardened concrete duct bank, which is not true of the existing lines that currently interconnect the two substations, with protection in view of the possibility that those lines could be disrupted when construction in the area inadvertently digs into the lines that are in place that connect the two substations. It also, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
It also provides some additional protection because the Morrissey Boulevard route is actually physically distant from the existing lines that interconnect the two substations. And the Sydney Street route, if there were, for example, to be a dig in along the Sydney Street route, would have a higher probability of potentially affecting not only the existing lines that interconnect the two substations, but also the new line that we're putting in specifically to avoid future dig-ins and disruptions.
So this is more of a hardening project from reliability standpoint than anything.
Exactly.
So it sounds like from the tentative decision that the hardening is really from a dig-in or construction activities. Is there anything that would be done while running this line to protect against flooding or increased stormwater runoff, or is that something that the system is currently exposed to without this project?
I guess I would say that the new line will have a certain level of protection because of the location that's planned for it. Although its plan is to run under Morrissey Boulevard, the plan would be to install it before the Morrissey Boulevard reconstruction takes place, which we understand will raise the level of Morrissey Boulevard in order to provide, greater protection from storms and flooding along that route.
Yeah, Ms. Sharkey, I could add a little bit of detail to that answer. The concrete duct bank that Ms. Sharkey's been describing is water resistant. So if a street like Morrissey Boulevard was inundated with water, the transmission lines themselves would not be flooded with water similarly. The same can be said for the splice vaults, which are sort of like large underground concrete chambers where the company joins together two segments of the transmission lines. And those are similarly sort of watertight containers that, would remain dry in the event of, either normal rain or a flooding type scenario. Both of the substations that are currently existing are well outside of the 100-year floodplains associated with Boston Harbor and are not adjacent to any other water resources like streams or wetlands or anything like that, which would sort of overtop its normal boundaries in the event of a flood.
Okay. And can you remind me, Ms. Sharkey, what efforts can be made to try to coordinate the project with any work happening at Morrissey in terms of reconstruction?
The company has been holding meetings with a number of different agencies, including DCR, who's in charge of the Morrissey Boulevard reconstruction. That happened both prior to the filing of the company's proposal, as they've gone through a consultation period. They also have been in meetings with Wynn Corporation, who is in charge of the Mary McCormick redevelopment reconstruction.
And are there either requirements in the tentative decision that we could discuss in more detail, or amendments we should add relating to accessibility of any public ways in terms of sidewalks or other safe passages along the street during the construction period?
I think they are coordinating with the city with regard to activities that are taking place. And that's also one of the reasons for the condition for the outreach plan.
Right.
So that people can go on the company's website and monitor the progress, see what areas of the neighborhood will be impacted during different phases of the construction as it moves along, and have an opportunity if they have particular access needs to be able to let the company know that, so that the company can revise its plans accordingly.
I'll offer a little bit more detail. The company will prepare traffic management plans, which will be reviewed by the MBTA, MassDOT, DCR, and the City of Boston. Traffic management plans, deal with automobile traffic principally, but also, focus on how pedestrians move around a construction site safely. So, the company represented that things like, bicycling or, other forms of mobility will be addressed in those traffic management plans, which the company will, develop in concert with the jurisdictional agencies for each roadway along the project.
Okay, I mean, I do really think on this piece, and I can bring these questions to the company when they're up as well, but we have to take a very hard look at walking and biking and access of that kind. Mr. Nelson, I see your hand up. Sorry, Chair Nelson.
I am both. So, Ms. Sharkey, if you could, on the need side, could you speak a little bit of if this line wasn't built and there was a dig in on the existing Andrew Dewar Square or the existing substations that were connecting through the radial loop? Could you describe how many customers would be affected in that dig in approximately? It may be more appropriate for the company, but I know I was reading about that in the tentative decision.
For the substation that serves the largest number of customers, that would be approximately 58,000 people. And the company actually has specifically addressed the issue of problems associated with maintaining the reliability of underground lines with a new reliability criteria because of past problems experienced, for example, in 2012 with the damage that was suffered at the Scotia Street substation and the high cost and prolonged outages associated with restoring service to customers then.
And the 58,000 customers, what area of Boston does that primarily serve?
I believe the 58,000 was for the Dewar Street substation.
Yeah.
And so that would be, I guess, more towards the Dorchester versus Andrew Square, which is
South Boston.
more like South Boston. Yes, sorry.
Okay. Yeah. Nope. That's helpful. I just wanted to get a geographical sense. So this will help ensure the reliability of both of those areas if
That's
connected. Right. Okay. Thank you.
If you don't mind, can I just follow up on that and ask, how frequent are these type of events where there's a dig-in?
I'm sorry, Chair, could you speak more clearly? It's not clear.
Is it not clear? I was just, as a follow-up to the Chair Nelson's question, I was just wondering how frequently these types of dig-ins happen, even without the same situation underground where we have very unreliable, not hardened infrastructure. How often, do these events kind of happen?
Well, specifically, the company talked about both the 2012 Scotia Street outage, which I think kicked off the company's determination that they needed to come up with a plan to better protect reliability for underground facilities. There also were issues recently associated with installing the same types of underground cables, although they were oil filled, near the K Street substation when they were putting in new lines. There are other reviews of overall reliability that the department conducts on an annual basis that address more broadly outages throughout, the whole service distribution territory.
I see Mr. Woodcock and then Ms. Fraser.
Thank you. Just to expand on Chair Nelson's questions on need, my interpretation of reading the tentative decision was that the South Boston reliability project had implications on developing this need. But I find it valuable to just describe the intersection between the transmission system for thermal load needs and how this affects the reliability on the distribution system. That may be a question for the petitioner, but I just wanted to clarify that a bit.
Do you want to jump in? I see Mr. Hazel gesturing.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Woodcock. The South Boston Reliability Project, which was approved in the, I think, 2015-16 timeframe, that led to the present configuration of the transmission lines. And that project was constructed to resolve a N-1 thermal overload issue. So previously, both substations were served by just two cables. So in that case, if there was a single outage on either of those cables, you could experience an entire substation outage. And then even worse, if there was an N-1 contingency with the previous configuration, you would lose both substations entirely. So the South Boston Reliability Project was really to solve that need, which was even more severe. Presently, under the system configuration that was built from the South Boston Reliability Project, the transmission system can sustain an N-1 outage without having a thermal overload. However, if there's an N-1 contingency, meaning both lines serving either substation are taken out by accident, that is the problem we're solving here today. So hopefully that clarifies a little bit about why we discussed the South Boston Reliability Project in the tentative decision. You also brought up the lower voltage distribution system. One of the areas we assessed in project need and project approach was whether, after a contingency occurs, could customers be supported by transferring loads through the lower voltage distribution network? That's sort of like the first step of problem solving that the company would look at. And ultimately, the company saw that the existing transfer capabilities on the 15 kilovolt system were insufficient to support the load of an entire substation that went out. So that's really why we arrived at a full transmission solution to solve this reliability need.
Okay, thank you. I did want to kind of ask about the precedent with this establishment of the Eversource's determination of the term they use is consequential load loss of 50 megawatts, and think of applications to that throughout their service territory. Are you aware that this would trigger similar upgrade if you applied the standard in their service territory?
There are a limited number of underground facilities outside basically the metropolitan Boston. They did look at a number of other substations in the area that presented similar configurations and were served by underground facilities, but none of them were anticipated to potentially have a consequential load loss of the magnitude that that could potentially be faced in this particular situation.
Ms. Sharkey, that might not be quite right. There are, I think, 2 or 3 other locations in the Eastern Mass where if you took this decision to be an ironclad approval of the 50 megawatt limit, then you would, I suppose, have to approve the 2 or 3 additional projects. I think and this would be more up to the lawyers, but I think we tried to write it that we were, in this particular case, we were, that the board would be approving the particular project, and you could have in mind the 50 megawatt criterion that the company is proposing. But I think we tried to write it that it wasn't, since we're just looking at one project, that we weren't agreeing to a statewide rule.
Yeah, that's a good point. It is written that way, I think, highlighting the types of facilities that are served by this project, a lot of hospitals. I just want to be careful, and it does seem as though you applied this, but it could be that I think we want to be very careful of how this is interpreted, and if we want to apply this for every situation going forward. So there are obviously a lot of hospitals. All hospitals are important, but we're going to have to certain weigh risk versus cost for these types of projects.
I agree with that. I hope that's how it would be interpreted in standard.
Well, let's not hope. Let's take a look at this section of the decision. Can Mr. Young or
having a hard time hearing?
sorry?
If you could speak a little bit closer to your mic.
Sorry, I just was going to say, let's not hope. Can we look at the section of the decision that references?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So this is the analysis and, This is the analysis and findings on project need. Let's see. And this is where we discuss the application of the company's reliability criteria that Commissioner Woodcock was discussing. The way that the staff tried to address the issue of setting a blanket precedent is really in this sentence here, that given the particular mix of critical customers in the project area. So it's not just that there's a hospital, or it's not just that there's high-rise buildings. It's really the sum of these particular critical customers in Dorchester, South Boston, et cetera, the whole south side of Boston for all intents and purpose. So this is our approach for sort of limiting the scope of the criteria, and would allow us to take these projects on a case-by-case basis should they come in the future.
So if I could just add, our intent was not to provide a blanket precedent endorsement of the company's latest planning criteria in SysPlan 15, which is what Commissioner Woodcock is referring to. But again, to deal with the particular circumstances and conditions in the project area that Mr. Hazel has highlighted in this section of the tentative decision. And I add to that another factor, which is implied by the term dense urban environment, is that there's really not a lot of space where the company would be able to locate emergency generators if it had a Scotia Street substation emergency type situation. 25 megawatt generators are very large. They burn fuel oil. They take a lot of space. And in fact, when Scotia Street happened, those generators had to be sited adjacent to the turnpike. And that type of space is really not readily available in this project area. So the contingency of losing cables to Andrew or Dewar substation would be very difficult to respond to. And a reason that the particulars here justify, in our view, approving the project from a need perspective. Other areas might have different circumstances. So that's how we're distinguishing this location from the general concept that the company has described in its planning documents.
So, I mean, I guess my read of this, go ahead.
Chair, I can't hear you.
I don't know what's going on. It was fine earlier. I can put
Fine. Andrew?
Yes, Secretary Theodoridis, we are having difficulty hearing you.
Okay.
I would
I have
suggest,
done anything or moved.
Right there.
Is it any better now?
Now it is.
I'll just shout. Okay.
sorry,
My concern, I guess, with this language is that it's pretty vague, or it could be applied to a variety of situations. And I just wonder what you just described, Mr. Green, was, I think, a specific and helpful detail about the ability to cite a generator in this type of environment as a backup source. I think to Mr. Woodcock's earlier line of questioning, being more clear here about the mix of critical customers and about the dense urban environment might be helpful in terms of the precedent set in this decision.
Secretary, I would suggest to have EFSB staff add a footnote to this sentence.
Okay.
that describes that the company's emergency response procedures, given an outage, would be challenged in or could be challenged in a dense urban environment, and therefore having the planning criteria be expanded is reasonable. Obviously worded better than how I just said that. But I think a footnote would be the right solution to add clarity to this sentence and to avoid this precedent being expanded.
And if I could, I didn't mean, I just wanted to be thoughtful about what we are establishing for precedent here. Obviously, any urban environment, you could probably make a strong case that they're critical facilities with a mixture of hospitals and vulnerable population groups. So just wanted to be careful. I think that may establish it. And I did find the reference to the other cities PLL standard is helpful as well. But I just wanted to point that out and get a scope of how many projects that we may be opening ourselves up to for at least proposals in the future. So thank you.
All right, I think I had Ms. Fraser next and then Mr. Moran.
Madam Chair, thank you. Mr. Hazel answered my question about the South Boston Reliability Project. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Moran?
Two things, just going back to the discussion about what the precedent is. I couldn't see on the screen, there seemed to be a footnote on that page that spoke a little bit about dense areas. I didn't know if that was relevant to the discussion we were just having, the bottom of the same page, the decision.
There's not a, wait, let me check, sorry.
21.
I think footnote 23.
Excuse me. So this footnote is in reference to, that Eversource should continue to evaluate sort of lower cost, more simple measures of solving these reliability projects before going all the way to a transmission solution. So this footnote definitely does mention, the concept of placing generators and things like that, but we'd have to modify it a little bit to speak to Commissioner Woodcock's concern. But good eye.
And I guess the question, as far as the system planning that the company's using, when they get to the 50 megawatt consequential load loss, at that point, that what triggers an evaluation of how to address that potential. It's not necessarily going to, we have to do transmission solution, but do they have the sort of ranked alternatives from?
Yes, the first step is to look at whether they can solve the problem with distribution switching on the lower voltage distribution network. So they look at, can other neighboring substations can serve that load through the sort of wires that are just out on the street. And in this case, they looked at all of the neighboring substations and said, oh, we could transfer a little bit of load here and a little bit of load there. And it did not amount to an appreciable amount of load that would really solve this problem. So I think even after the distribution switching was affected, there would still be close to 100 megawatts of unserved load. So like twice as large as the company's threshold. After the distribution switching, they look at whether there is a sort of whether the problem could be addressed with a contingency plan, which is sort of like, could you roll out enough portable generators into the area to eliminate the problem, as was done in the Scotia Street outage. The company does not like to rely on, they don't like to rely on the need to, tear up the streets and connect emergency generators everywhere. And in any case, during the Scotia Street outage, Eversource was able to supply about 40 megawatts of temporary generation, throughout the city. And again, in this case, we'd be left with about 100 megawatts of unserved load. So, restoring all of that with temporary generators is, in the company's estimation, not really a feasible solution to this project. And the tentative decision, in requesting approval of the project, obviously agrees with that assessment.
Great, thank you.
Are there other questions from the board, and is my audio better?
It is.
Okay.
Yes.
Phew. Okay. Thank you for the tip, Mr. Green.
You're welcome.
Other questions for, sorry, Ms. Sharkey. Okay. Not seeing any. I believe we are moving, let's get back to the right place in my agenda. So before we begin with comments by the parties, I'd like to note that the Siting Board received timely written comments on the tentative decision from Eversource and from intervener William Brennan. All comments received have been posted online and are accessible to the public in the Siting Board's electronic file room. And I will turn first to Eversource for comments on the tentative decision. I note that Eversource is represented in this matter by Catherine Puthen and Cheryl Blaine. I would ask if counsel for the company wishes to make any comments on the tentative decision. Sorry, I pronounced your name wrong, Ms. Cuthen.
Hi, no problem. Yes, we would, thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members and staff of the Energy Facilities Siting Board. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name, as you mentioned, is Catherine Cuthan, and I am appearing today with co-counsel Cheryl Blaine on behalf of Eversource Energy in this proceeding. Also attending this virtual meeting are various members of the Eversource project team who testified before the Siting Board during the evidentiary hearing in this matter. My comments will be brief. The Andrews Square to Dewar Street transmission reliability project is urgently needed to avoid the potential for a prolonged outage with serious adverse consequences to public health, safety, and welfare in a densely populated urban area. The company strongly supports the tentative decision's approval of the project, which is based on a thorough analysis of the issues in the proceeding, substantial record evidence, in consistency with the Siting Board's broad authority and well-established precedent. The tentative decision addresses each aspect of the Siting Board's statutory mandate with factual findings that are appropriate and well supported by the record. The company therefore requests that the Siting Board adopt the tentative decision approving the project, including the staff's proposed amendments that were presented today by Presiding Officer Sharkey as its final decision in this proceeding. I would like to just address one of the issues that the members of the board were recently discussing and really just sort of emphasizing that something that Mr. Hazel said, which is with regard to SysPlan 15, that system planning guideline requires the company to take a close look at situations where more than 50 megawatts of power would be lost. It does not require a solution. And as Mr. Hazel said, the company would first look at distribution alternatives and situations. So the company does not view the Siting Board's approval of this project as a blanket approval of projects that are implicated by this SysPlan 15. With that, I conclude my remarks and I am available to address any of the other questions that you may have at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cuthan. Are there questions from the board? Yes, Ms. Fraser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Attorney Cuthan, I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. Just wanted to touch on the planning process, and if you could explain what has changed about the company's planning process since the South Boston Reliability Project.
I believe that SysPlan 15 was a system planning guideline that was established after that, although I would have to confirm the exact date. It was, as mentioned previously, in part developed to address situations such as has happened at Scotia Street in recognition of the urgent need to make sure that the company reliably serves areas of dense population where there are many critical customers. It's also in recognition of situations whereas here, underground lines are subject to faults, not just from dig-ins, as was mentioned before, but all kinds of potential failures. And in such events, it can take a very lengthy time to both locate and repair such underground failures.
Thank you for that. And Madam Chair, I had just one other question at this time. Can you explain why the company is proposing to install a project along Morrissey Boulevard instead of another road?
Sure. As Presiding Officer Sharkey mentioned, the company initially started out, once it determined the need for the project, in analyzing many, many routes, looking at existing corridors as both I-93, the MBTA route, as well as all as many streets in between the two substations that could be used to connect them. And then based on engineering criteria as well as environmental criteria, the company whittled down the list to the two most promising routes, and then did a more detailed analysis of the impacts, cost, and reliability of each of the two alternatives. And based on that analysis, it was determined that the Morrissey Street route would be the preferred route based on overall benefits, and both in terms of environmental impacts. As Ms. Sharkey mentioned, the cost is relatively the same, although the project is less expensive. And increased reliability in this case was also an important factor.
Thank you. That's all I have for now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Other questions? Yes, Chair Nelson.
We had a question earlier around the company's coordination, particularly with other municipal groups and groups that would be digging in the streets. Could you maybe talk a little bit about, if the tentative decision was adopted by the board, what the next steps would be by the company to ensure that the most efficient work on the street was being done, and that we weren't putting something in that was going to have to be dug up, in a year?
So yes, the company has been throughout the development of the project since approximately 2018, I believe, been working with various state and municipal agencies that have jurisdiction or projects in the area. And in particular, the company has been working with the developers of the Mary McCormick housing project to see if, because that is under development as well, and to see to what extent coordination of construction in that area can be achieved. In addition, the company has been working with and will continue to work with DCR in connection with their reconstruction projects. In addition, the company continues to work with other agencies in Boston to make sure that their project is, also as coordinated as possible with other construction projects that will be occurring in the area.
Okay, thank you.
I just note on the, the Morrissey resiliency work itself, that is a project with the city, MassDOT, and DCR. So there are multiple prongs to that Morrissey Boulevard project. Mr. Woodcock, I see your hand up.
Thank you. Yes, could you expand on the methodology at arriving at the 50 megawatt threshold? And also, I want to maybe to an additional point is we have dedicated a lot of resources for resiliency for critical infrastructure, especially with hospitals, with combined heat and power grants and storage. And just broadly, when you're thinking about this for other projects, are there more targeted solutions for critical infrastructure rather than kind of a specific upgrade on the distribution system?
Yes, I think I can answer both questions. So with regard to the 50 megawatt CLL threshold, the company, I believe, looked at its past history as well as the thresholds that ISO New England had and that other electric companies in the region had. And it also analyzed what the impacts were in particular areas of different size outages, and so or the amounts of megawatts that could be lost as a result. And they determined that that particularly in a dense urban area, that 50 megawatts as a threshold would be an appropriate point at which to, as I mentioned before, examine the situation more carefully and analyze whether a solution was necessary and required under the circumstances, and then what that solution might be, and whether a transmission solution is needed or whether other solutions such as distribution could be identified to ensure that reliable power could be achieved. The other question you asked was, I think there was a second part of it. Now I'm losing.
Sorry, I had asked about, the issue of critical infrastructure and whether more targeted deployment of either on-site redundant generation or other resilient measures was contemplated with this situation and would be applied in future reviews.
Yes, thank you for reminding me. So yes, the company did in this situation, as well as in others, examine whether things, first of all, it does in terms of looking at alternatives, look at both non-transmission alternatives as well as transmission and distribution alternatives. So certainly the company looked at those and analyzed those solutions, potential solutions compared to the project, again, in terms of cost, impacts, reliability. But also you mentioned that the company also looked at the possibility of resolving the potential reliability issue that might occur by the use of temporary generators. And it determined that, again, because of the density of the area, it really would not be a feasible solution, and in fact would have negative environmental impacts. The company did use temporary generators because it was required, it was the only solution when the Scotia Street situation arose in 2012 due to a fire. But that really was both, it caused environmental impacts, and it was also sort of unsafe with people walking around and things like that. So while the company will continue to investigate the potential use for portable transformers, and in certain cases those are entirely appropriate, the company does not feel that that would be an appropriate solution for this particular area.
Thank you.
If I may just jump in
Go ahead.
to further respond to Commissioner Woodcock's question. The critical facilities that Presiding Officer Sharkey and Mr. Hazel were referring to, many of those do have emergency generators to back up critical loads in the event of an outage. They're not necessarily designed for long-term operation. And the problem with an underground cable disruption that's hard to locate and repair is that it can last days, weeks, or even longer, as we saw with Scotia Street in 2012. So the idea of having sort of targeted relief by having storage or on-site generation for critical loads is very good and helpful for preserving reliability of those facilities, but they're also 58,000 other customer accounts served by the Dewar Street substation. And I just want to point out that when we talk about 58,000 customer accounts, that's 58,000 bills that are sent out every month. There are many more people who receive service for each of those bills, whether it's a family or a business. So we're really talking about a huge number of people. And even if the critical facilities were able to operate during this disruption of, let's say, a dual cable curtailment to the substation, many people would be very hard pressed during that time, and the company would be really challenged to respond to that with its own generation, 25 megawatt generators that it would have to site somewhere, fuel, and connect to either a substation or load centers, which is very challenging when you don't have a lot of real estate to work with. So that's my additional thought about your question, Commissioner.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Andy. And then, I think we should always constantly challenge whether additional technology and a non-transmission alternative can supplant or mitigate the reliability need. And obviously that's been a big effort from DWR.
Ms. Huthen, I've seen information in the tentative decision about outreach going forward. Can you speak at all to the community engagement or outreach that's happened as the company has considered the different alternatives?
Sure. As part of its typical process, when the company began planning the project, the company had outreach meetings or a community meeting with the with residents and businesses in the local area to, discuss the project so that they would be aware of it. In addition, as noted before, with regard to the process itself, it was noticed in several languages, et cetera. Going forward, the company, pursuant to the condition, but also as part of its own process, will develop a comprehensive outreach plan for the project so that the public and nearby abutters and businesses will be made aware of the scheduled start, duration, and hours of construction, and ways to contact the company should any issues arise.
And can you talk about, I think both ways, there's a number of conditions in here related to hours and noise. Can you talk about some of the noise mitigation measures, also construction dust and other impacts from the construction itself?
Yes, the company uses what's referred to as best management practices with regard to all of the potential environmental impacts. With regard to noise, the construction hours in residential areas are limited to daytime hours. And in addition, the company always uses the most noise reducing equipment commonly available. It has anti-idling requirements that it requires its contractors to use, things like that. I believe, in addition, the decision asked the company to provide more information with regard to if nighttime construction or the potential use for sound barriers. And although the company does not commonly use those, that they will use those as required and appropriate.
Yes, I do see a condition for nighttime sound barriers with nighttime cable splicing operations. There is a condition in here, and this may be a question for board staff rather than for the company, but if you have a perspective on this, I will ask Ms. Kuthman. There's a note here in the conditions on arranging for off-peak delivery of project equipment and materials. And I'm wondering what that off-peak timeline looks like, given that there may not be as much of a peak as we had pre-pandemic with traffic patterns and the like. What does that off-peak, what would that off-peak delivery timeline look like for the company?
Yeah, I think that I don't think that I can answer that precisely, but I think that the company would work with the, with the city and determine in its traffic management plans address what the appropriate times were based on studies of when peak traffic hours were. And that's certainly something the company is willing and able to accommodate.
Okay, so we could actually better understand, rather than defining that up front, what those specific conditions are at the street level. It sounds like.
Yes.
Ms. Fraser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Attorney Kuthman, just a quick question about traffic. Can you explain exactly how traffic will flow out of the JFK MBTA station while the project is being installed?
Yes, I guess, first of all, the company will ensure that there is access to the MBTA station at all times. And again, this will be addressed specifically in working with the MBTA and with the city of Boston in terms of the specific requirements that will be undertaken by the company to manage the traffic in that area.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, additional questions for the company? You know, we can come back to both the company and to the staff as we move through additional comments. Okay. We do have a break coming at 2:30, so I think this may be a reasonable time to pause. Andy, are we planning on taking 10 minutes?
Yes, so maybe if we came back at 2:40.
Yep. Okay, let's all adjourn and come back at 2:40. And I think I have to say off the record. Is that correct? To get us
Yes.
off? Okay, thank you. Okay, I think I see all members of the board back and present with us, and Mr. Green. So we will go back on the record.
I don't see Mr. Casey.
Oh, thank you. You're right.
There he is.
Okay, perfect. So we are moving on now to interveners and limited participants. There are 2 interveners in the proceeding. There are no limited participants in the proceeding. And so I will ask that the interveners, if they would like to present comments to the board. First, we are looking for William Brennan. Let's see. Mr. Green, do you see him, or should we can come back? Oh, you're on mute.
He was here before the break, so I'm trying to see if he's still with us.
Let's give him another moment then.
Anybody else? No? He seems to have left the meeting.
Is Ms. McCormick here while we try to get Mr. Brennan on?
I don't see Ms. McCormick as well. So those are the 2 interveners in the proceeding. We do not have any limited participants in this matter. So unless Mr. Brennan or Ms. McCormick come back, I think we probably should move on to other public comments.
Okay, so we will move to comments from members of the public, and if Mr. Brennan or Ms. McCormick join us, we will jump back to them. Okay, so I will call on members of the public to comment in the order in which they pre-registered, if we have a list. If you did not sign up to speak but wish to do so, please just raise your hand, the raise your hand feature on Zoom, or dial *9 for anyone calling in. And when I call your name, just please state and spell your name for the stenographer and provide your address. If we can see your name, I don't think we need to spell it, do we, Mr. Green?
The stenographers generally like that, but
Okay.
I'll leave that up to Mr. Arsenault.
Okay.
We have just, I believe, one commenter that pre-registered, and he is in the panel, Mr. Skolka.
Yes. Hello. Hey, can you hear me?
Not having difficulty hearing. Could you,
Hold on.
if you haven't already, would you select English as your language? I think that may help your audio.
Hey, Elsa, does this help?
That helps.
Okay.
Yes.
Because I've got an external microphone. It wasn't entirely hooked up. Sorry, my look of shock was, Mr. Green, you said my name correctly. So
I apologize.
No, you said it correctly. It was stunning. Yeah.
That doesn't happen very often. So
it's an impossible name. My name is Mike Skolka. Mike Szkolka. I live 193 Savin Hill Ave in Dorchester. I am president of the Columbia Savin Hill Civic Association as well. So yeah, I actually thank you for having me, everybody. I want to reiterate also along with my friend Reverend Mariama White Hammond, this time of day is tough for many people to join. You know, I think most people were not really aware of these plans at all. So I was able to read the tentative decision, and it was, you know, I mean, it took some time. I didn't read maybe every word, but thank you for sending it out. I do appreciate everybody getting it. Now, I want to second one of Reverend Mariama's points. The added development coming into this area, as I think maybe even more significant than anyone has addressed up until now. Now, the area covered just by the Columbia Savin Hill Civic Association area, it's about 10 to 15% of the area covered by the Dewar Street substation. 10 to 15%. We are expecting, and that includes projects that are underway, projects that have been completed, and projects that are soon to be underway, and projects that we can assume will be planned. Like the Glover's Corner project is very close to us. It's in our area. There are no official plans, but we can guesstimate, right? From the size and the scope of that project, the Columbia Savin Hill Civic Association area is expecting 10,000, at a minimum, 10,000 residential units and over 4 million square feet of commercial space. That's with Dorchester Bay City, a lot of the projects going on Morrissey Boulevard, the Beat, the new condos at Hub 25, the ones replacing the Beasley Media Center. Now, that's literally in a small part of the Dorr Street substation area. There's also plenty of projects along Blue Hill Ave. There's plenty of projects further south on Dodd Ave that I'm actually compiling a map that shows the kind of scope of these new developments, including the South End, because the South End is part of Dorr Street, I think. There's a good chance that for the entire area, you're actually looking at another 30,000 residential households. And I look, I don't want to sound like an alarmist. I really don't. You know, I'm actually a pretty relaxed person, but this is massively concerning. Massively concerning. And I don't blame anyone on the board. I don't blame the Eversource representatives at all, because I do blame the way planning and development is approached in the city and city agencies and state agencies. I think they need to take a broader look at comprehensive planning. That's significant. But you know, I'm more than happy to provide like the map that I'm working on. The 10,000 units I already have, I can send that to someone in the board and it can be shared. I can send it to Eversource. I just worry about one of the things that was talked about was making sure that we don't have to re-dig up these things and put in new materials. Over the next 10 years, the numbers are going to grow astronomically in this area. 58,000 is not a reasonable number. And again, I want to emphasize, I'm happy to work with the board, and I'm happy to work with Eversource on figuring out a more reasonable number. But that's concerning. That's concerning. We'd like to be able to run our lights and, you know, not have traffic lights just stop working in front of us. I'll stop there for that. But then in terms of the routing, which now has become much less of an issue for me, the primary route is clearly better. Tearing up Sydney Street is a disaster. Sydney Street is already overcrowded as it is. People already lack parking. Having to do work on that street would be is a complete disaster for the residents of Sydney, along with the two schools that are on that roadway, Boston Collegiate Charter and Cristo Rey High School. The Morrissey Boulevard route is considerably better. So as the project is approved, and it should be approved, primary route, definitely support that. But I don't want to take away from the added development coming in. We need to plan for this. We need to be ready. That's about it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. And just looking, Mr. Green, do we have other public comments registered, or have our other
we do have one commenter. I was just I did perhaps want to respond a little bit to Mr. Skolka's concerns about load growth in the area. And as other members of our team have pointed out, the primary driver for the project was not the anticipation of load growth. It was what happens now if there is a break in the two cables that serve the Andrew and Dewar substations. So that would bring on an immediate crisis if that were to happen, particularly on a day like today, with high loads and obviously a great need for reliable electricity. But I will say that the project does offer benefits in terms of adding capacity to the Dorchester, South Boston, Roxbury load area by providing, in effect, 4 cables to each of the substations, by bringing the two pairs together in tandem and connecting them through this new line. So it adds a lot of resiliency and extra capacity to the transmission system, which was not predicted as needed based on load growth, but it is a benefit. And I think it goes a long way towards addressing the concerns that you're raising, Mr. Skolka, about the very likely scenario for a lot of additional development.
And
No, it does.
I was going to ask that as a follow-up question was, is there concern that should there be significant load growth in the area that this project would need to be replaced, or is it likely other measures would be put into place in addition to this line?
I'm not sure we have a record-based answer to that question, but the projections of load growth in the case indicated that this project would be more than adequate to meet the anticipated loads of the future, and probably then some, by joining these two substations together and building a loop out of, again, what Ms. Sharkey described as sort of a dead-end architecture, where these substations are the end of the line. They connect to nothing other than K Street and the distribution system. And now they become part of a transmission system, which provides a lot of options in the event of load growth or immediate disruptions of one kind or another.
Your point is very well taken, Mr. Skolka. You know, with electrification, with development, with days like this becoming more frequent in the summer, we've seen significant heat waves. Ensuring we have capacity to meet load growth, and then ensuring the resiliency of the system so that we don't have outages is certainly a key consideration for the board here. All right, Mr. Green, you said
Yes.
there was someone else?
We do. We have, I think our next requested speaker is Tom Chisena, and I will move Mr. Chisena to the panel.
Hi. Just change my backgrounds from work. There we go.
We see you and we can hear you.
Hi, folks. Thank you for your time and for the hearing. Tom Chisena, C-H-I-S-E-N-A, and I live on 26 Mosley Street. So just a couple comments here and questions I had for this. So first off, just to echo the other public comment that I strongly prefer the primary route from the neighborhood. I talked to a couple of my neighbors and we also feel the same in the terms of the congestion on Sydney Street and also on Buttonwood would just be incredibly disruptive. With that, if we do have to resort to the secondary route, I don't understand, like, the way the one-ways work. They all get funneled down Buttonwood and down Sydney. So is there any possibility of that if we do have to resort to the second route, which again, I really don't want, I really prefer the primary, that we could reverse the direction of the one-ways or allow them for two-ways or contingency plan to route around, because otherwise people won't be able to move in and out of the streets just for as long as that construction is on there. I don't know if it's easier for me to ask all of my questions at once, but so I just kind of will. My second question then would be, in terms of, I mentioned earlier that the problem with the construction or hitting the lines with results, the kind of the onus for this would be, right, if there is an issue with one of these two stations, that it's really difficult and hard to fix and correct that. I don't want this to be a Band-Aid then to not fix those work, right? Are we ensuring that, like, there's not going to just allow oil to continue to leak because, you know, we have these other stopgaps to fix in there? Like, what kind of assurances are we that if there is an issue that will be corrected as urgently as if this line wasn't there? And my third question then is, I noticed that with the primary route, and again, that is my preferred option, but it does pass through Patton's Cove. I know that Patton's Cove has tons of flooding, that water in and out is really important to protect, wildlife there, and also to control things like insect populations from becoming out of control. Like, what assurances are we that it's not going to sincerely disrupt, water flow and tidal flow of Patton Cove?
Chair, would you like us to respond to some of those questions?
Yeah, I was going to ask what the best way to respond to some of those questions are, if you'd like to do it now or in a different portion of the script.
Mr. Green, I can answer those questions if this is an acceptable time.
It's acceptable to me.
Thank
Sure.
you. As far as your first question, the reversing one-way streets or more drastic traffic measures would be at the discretion of the city. So basically, Eversource would need to work out traffic management plans that would be approved by the city, and so it would just be basically would be up to the city of Boston to decide whether or not that's a good idea. The tentative decision as written does not recommend approval of the noticed alternative route. So, I guess we'll find out when the board votes, but, the tentative decision as written would not use Sydney Street. And one of the main reasons that we felt that was necessary was because of the same traffic concerns that you're raising here today. So that is definitely something that we were paying attention to and wanted to avoid. To your second question about Patton's Cove and the tidal flows that go through that box culvert, actually, Mass DEP required Eversource to confirm whether the way that they're attaching the new transmission line to the bottom of that box culvert would not impede tidal flows. So Eversource went back out with a survey crew and they looked at all the existing elevations of the utility conduits going on the underside of the roadway. And they confirmed that the bottom of the transmission line after it's installed will be above the lowest point in the box culvert. So it will not restrict any tidal flow through that box culvert.
Thank you, Mr. Hazel. I think that got to, those were good answers to all three.
Yeah, great. Thank you. No further questions. I just want to make sure those were addressed. Yeah.
No, very, very good questions and of interest to the board as well. So thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Green, I see a hand on the list.
Yes, Jan Saglio is moving to the panel to comment.
Hello. For some reason, I don't see my picture there. Is that a problem? I'm on Zoom. There we go. Start video. Now I have a control. Hi, thank you for having this hearing today. I'm here. I'm Janet Saglio, S-A-G-L-I-O, on behalf of Boston Collegiate Charter School. We wanted to just comment on how difficult the alternative route would be for our school. We're located directly on Sydney Street. Our lower school campus is there. It's 200 lower school children, staff, administrators, and a daycare. And we are immediately on the sidewalk. There's no setback at all. We also are very close to the intersection of with Crescent Street. And so our buses have to come around that corner and then unload and reload our kids every day, sort of either on the other side of the street or in the middle of the street with a crossing guard. So there's like no way to do that with construction going on the street that we can imagine. We also have a parking lot on the other side of the street, a small lot that we've been using for breaks for the kids, as you know, during the pandemic. And I think that's something we're going to keep up because we've learned so much about how helpful breaks are for young children in school. So we just wanted to make clear that the transportation and issue of loading and unloading would be big for us. And of course, the noise. All of our classrooms face the street except for a couple of smaller classrooms, probably so that they didn't face the highway and the subway line that are immediately on the other side of the school. So anyway, we wanted to make sure you knew about that, and we're pleased to hear that you're not considering the alternative route at this point. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Saglio, for your comments. That is good to hear, and I think a primary consideration of the boards is how can this be as how can we minimize disruptions and ensure that people who are actively using streets and spaces in the city are less disrupted. So thank you very much. Mr. Green, are there additional?
I'm not seeing any other participants with their hands raised, but I would just give a shout out to anybody who would like to comment who has not done so to use the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen if you would like to offer a comment while we have that opportunity. Anybody? Not seeing any hands going up. So I think we can move forward.
And I will do one last check to see if either of the interveners are here, but I don't see them on the list. So we're looking for Mr. Brennan or Ms. McCormick.
You are correct.
So the board will now proceed to deliberations on the tentative decision. After discussion by the board, we will then consider any amendments to the tentative decision by staff, and then any additional amendments from board members. So to begin the deliberations, we need a main motion. So before we even, just so any folks watching understand the process, before we even begin having the discussion on the motion, we actually need to have the motion on the floor. So do I have a motion to adopt the tentative decision?
So motioned.
So motion by Chair Nelson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Mr. Bonfiglio. So we will leave the main motion on the floor and begin deliberations. Is there anyone who would like to begin today? Mr. Nelson?
I would say, yeah. So I would say that I am interested to see if we have that draft footnote to review. And I just want to acknowledge the comments from the public that the tentative decision as written regarding the main route seems to be the preference of the community, and that is good. That's a good thing. I don't think I would be supportive of a secondary route choice.
Chair Nelson, I can tell you that the staff has drafted language, not as a footnote, but as an insert to some of the main body of the tentative decision, and we can share a screen and bring that up so you can see it within the placement within the decision that we'd propose. And I'll read the language then as well, so it will be can be translated for people who are watching.
Okay.
So this is the same paragraph. I hope that's large enough for everyone to see.
That's great.
This is the same paragraph we were looking at earlier in the afternoon. The additions are in red text here. Ms. Sharkey, if you'd like to read it, it's the floor is yours.
Thank you. After the sentence ending, each cable pair is potentially vulnerable to third-party damage that would result in an extended outage, we would propose to add the sentence, in addition, it would be extremely difficult to locate sufficient emergency generation throughout the project area should it be needed. The next sentence that's already in the tentative decision reads, the siting board finds that given the particular mix of critical customers in the project area and the complex challenges associated with repairing underground lines in a dense urban environment, we would add and difficulties associated with deploying emergency generators and end the additional language at that point. And that was to address the concerns that were raised by both Chairman Nelson and Commissioner Woodcock.
What do you think, Mr. Nelson? From my perspective, I think that addresses most of my concerns.
Yeah, Commissioner Woodcock, do you find this
quiet,
language?
Mr. Nelson.
Oh, sorry, I was just wondering if Commissioner Woodcock found this language to, it was his
Sorry,
line.
Mr. Nelson, stop, please. We need to have you unmute and then speak loudly right from the beginning because I did not hear you.
My question was if Commissioner Woodcock found the language acceptable.
Yes, yeah, thank you. I think we're articulating that there are a number of factors that lead to this decision. And as a result, we'll take similar situations on a case-by-case basis, weighing all these factors as well as cost. Thank you.
And for the record, this is page 30 of the tentative decision.
I'm good with this language as well.
So I imagine if we're going to add this, we need this to be added to the list of amendments.
It would be added as a proposed amendment to the staff's amendment sheet.
Okay. Thank you. I generally agree, Mr. Nelson. It seems like the comments we have heard today suggest this route has less impact than an alternative route would have had in terms of both traffic and things like schools. And I saw that reflected in the tentative decision as well. You know, I think a day like today also really reminds me of what happens if we had some kind of incident on a line like this and that number of people lost power. So I am, you know, very supportive, I think, of the tentative decision at this point, both the route and the need for the project. I am wondering if we've done enough in the conditions around the route in terms of walking and biking. I noticed that hours are mentioned in there, but not selection of routing. And I don't know if that's something that would be covered as part of hours in discussions with the agencies. That's, you know, not an area of my expertise. I just wanted to ask the siting board if we should be, you know, more specific about any of those requirements.
Mr. Hazel, would you care to jump in on that point?
Yeah, yes, yes, we as staff understand that the company's traffic management plans, you know, pertain to automobiles and also to, you know, pedestrian modes of transportation, but that is probably not apparent to everyone. So I think it's probably a good idea to acknowledge that these traffic management plans also, you know, address bicycles and pedestrians, you know, other forms of handicap mobility. I don't know if I'm forgetting any other modes of transportation that should be addressed.
Electric scooters.
Electric scooters. Mr. Green, I could bring the tentative decision up and we could try and figure out some language now, or perhaps there'd be another pause period where I could do it offline.
Well, I think if we're just adding a reference in the traffic management plan conditions to the addition of consideration of pedestrians, bicyclists, and other non-motorized or micromobility type vehicles, I think that maybe that addresses the general concern.
I think that would probably work. Yes.
And that includes scooters too, by the way.
That I hadn't heard that term before, but I think that would include scooters.
It's also my understanding that the DCR's plans for the reconstruction of Morrissey Boulevard is going to expand on the accessibility of the newly revised Morrissey Boulevard for walking and cycling and other use of the reconstructed boulevard, and providing access to some of the park areas that are adjacent. So to the extent the company is coordinating its plans with Morrissey Boulevard, those will be part of their planning and the traffic management coordination with DCR.
Yeah, I think that is also going to be key if this is happening, in parallel to a major construction project on Morrissey. The possibility of the area in general is going to be, may not be as viable as if this was limited to the transmission line. So I guess a lot will depend on the coordination and the scheduling of all of it.
I just have one follow-up point. Dr. Kumin contacted me offline and reminded me that in the evidence section of the tentative decision on page 87, we have a list of bullet points which describe what will be included in the traffic management plan, and one of those bullet points is routing and protection of pedestrian and bicycle traffic, so that we could still fold that into the language into the actual condition, that actually binds Eversource to making sure those things are in there. But just wanted to point out that as written, the TD does acknowledge pedestrian traffic, and thank you, Dr. Kumin, for pointing that out.
Okay, that's a great note, but I think we should include it in the condition as well.
Absolutely.
Okay. Other thoughts or comments as Mr. Hazel prepares that addendum? Mr. Casey, I see you unmuted. I don't know if you. No, just unmute. Okay.
Just at the ready, Madam Secretary. Just at the ready.
Okay. Let me go back to my place in the deliberations. So I think that, Mr. Hazel, do we need to see this piece before we move on to the motions, or can we see it as we're moving through these? Perhaps I should ask Mr. Green this question.
Hey, Mr. Green, would you care to reply?
Again, I think we're talking about just adding a few words to the condition. So
yeah.
This might fall into the sort of the minimus category that we don't need to draft it.
Okay, that would be even better. That would be even better.
But you will review the final decision before it's issued to make sure it's consistent.
Yes. Okay. So now we will move to any motions to amend the notice of inquiry. Oh, I'm on the wrong section here. Skip too far ahead. So we need a motion to amend the tentative decision to include the proposed amendments included on the staff's amendment sheet, including the change to the text on page.
Well, for the project need analysis and findings, that's page 30. And
page 30 for the project.
The forthcoming language about pedestrians will be on page 89.
Perfect. Page 30 and page 89.
I'm sorry, Dean, we'll also need to put it at the end of the decision.
In the conditions.
In the condition section, so that language will appear again.
That's correct. That's page 119.
Thank you.
And 119. So do I have a motion?
I will
So
motion
moved.
that.
Thank you, Mr. Woodcock. Do I have a second?
Ryan
Second,
Casey, I'll second.
A second from Mr. Casey. Is there any discussion on the proposed staff amendments? Okay, I will now ask for a roll call vote by the board in favor or opposed to the amendments on the staff amendment sheet, as well as the additional changes to text previously discussed. The motion to include the staff amendments, oh, sorry, I'm going ahead again. So let's take a vote.
Would you like me to call the roll?
I would, thank you, Mr. Green.
Chair Nelson,
supportive, yay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I saw you, did not hear you.
Yes, supportive of the
Not
amendment.
hearing you. Careful with the audio. Can we pause for a second, Andy?
sure. If you haven't selected English, that might be the problem.
I am supportive of the amendment.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fraser,
I support the amendment.
Commissioner Woodcock,
Yes.
Deputy Commissioner Moran,
Yes.
General Counsel Costco,
Yes.
Mr. Bonfilio,
Yes.
and Mr. Casey.
Yes.
Need me?
And the secretary.
I'm the chair.
Yes. All right, so the motion to include the amendments with the tentative decision is approved. We do not have any additional amendments that we have not discussed. So we, unless there are any others from any other board members who would like to propose any at this point. Okay. So I think we are at the point where we can finalize the main motion and approve the tentative decision proposed by staff with the staff amendments and the text changes we have just approved. And as just described, the main motion now before us is to approve the tentative decision as amended. Is there any further discussion before I call for a vote? Okay, hearing none. We will now vote on the main motion as amended. Mr. Green, can you take a roll, please?
Chair Nelson,
Yes.
Commissioner Fraser,
Yes.
Commissioner Woodcock,
Yes.
Deputy Commissioner Moran,
Yes.
General Counsel Costco,
Yes.
Mr. Bonfilio,
Yes.
Mr. Casey,
Yes.
Secretary Theo Herodis.
Yes. All right, the motion as amended is approved unanimously. With that vote, the setting board will now proceed to issue a final decision inclusive of the approved amendments, and staff is hereby directed to prepare a final decision as amended for the chair's signature. Thank you very much to the staff. So the other item we have on the agenda for today's meeting is consideration of initiating a notice of inquiry, hereafter an NOI, by the Energy Facilities Siting Board on its own motion into procedures for enhancing public awareness and participation in its proceedings. Once again, I will turn to Presiding Officer Sharkey to describe the proposed notice of inquiry and possible next steps for the Siting Board. Ms. Sharkey.
The notice of inquiry would initiate an examination of procedural enhancements in the Siting Board's practices in order to increase public awareness of and participation in its proceedings. As part of the NOI, the Siting Board would explore avenues to increase the visibility of its public notices and to promote equitable and meaningful public and stakeholder involvement throughout its proceedings, from initial public comment hearings through evidentiary hearings and ultimately board meetings such as this one. The initiative is rooted in two fundamental policy objectives applicable to the Siting Board. The first is environmental justice, as reflected in EEA's environmental justice policy, which was recently updated, various executive orders, and recent climate change legislation with environmental justice provisions that were signed by Governor Baker. The second driver of the NOI is the Commonwealth's language access policy, which was issued by the Executive Office of Administration and Finance in 2015. The language access policy requires executive branch agencies and boards, such as the EFSB, to provide language access services such as translation of documents and interpretation of oral communications in our proceedings, and encourages the development of plans and procedures to implement these practices. While these are two separate policies, they share common objectives in ensuring a full and meaningful opportunity for people to participate in state agency business activities and services, regardless of their English language proficiency. You may be wondering, hasn't the Siting Board already been doing this for some time now? The answer is yes, but there are definitely opportunities for improvement that have been suggested during the course of several recent cases that could help the board fulfill these policy objectives in a better, more inclusive, and more meaningful way. Staff views the NOI as an important opportunity to focus specifically on the question of how to enhance public awareness and participation in its proceedings and get significant public comment and suggestions on how to do so. We envision the end product of the NOI being reflected in a Siting Board environmental justice strategy, which is part of the environmental justice implementation process required by several recently updated EEA environmental justice policy publications. Efforts to develop agency-specific EJ strategies have been launched across the Secretariat and are now ongoing. In order to initiate the NOI, staff has drafted a series of questions designed to elicit comments, suggestions, proposals, and recommended best practices across an array of topics that will help further public awareness and participation in Siting Board proceedings. Staff proposes issuing specific questions, but also welcome any other relevant information and suggestions commenters may wish to offer. It should be noted the Department of Public Utilities initiated a similar NOI in a separate proceeding, DPU 21-50, and a number of the questions we are suggesting for the Siting Board's NOI are similar to those posed by the DPU. We are suggesting a response date for comments in early September to give commenters adequate time to provide responses. Upon issuance of the written NOI, we recommend a broad outreach effort to distribute the NOI to a wide array of stakeholders and reach the general public as well. To accomplish this, we have compiled extensive email service lists of participants in our proceedings in recent years. In addition, we are planning on working with the DPU and EEA communications team to reach an even wider audience of elected officials, municipalities throughout the Commonwealth, and others. We are planning on various forms of notification to prospective commenters, including newspaper notices, a dedicated website, and social media outreach, all in multiple languages. We welcome any additional suggestions to help spread the word. Staff will be happy to provide additional information about the proposed notice of intent and answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Sharkey. And as you and I know the EFSB team knows, this is a key priority at EEA and for Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito moving forward as we do the work of reshaping our energy system to make sure that the decisions we're making provide equitable access and ensure goals coming out of the environmental justice pieces of the legislation that was passed and the work we've been doing on this issue for a number of years now. So appreciate the effort of the EFSB staff to prepare this NOI and to develop the list of questions and to seek additional feedback. Are there questions for staff on this NOI or suggestions? Mr. Nelson?
I just want to compliment staff as well. I think certainly Commissioner Frazier and I worked on the DPU order, which will be almost a sister order to this one. But very happy to see the siting board take it and adopt it, the theme of it for the siting board. So well done there. And I think it's going to make meaningful progress for improving the process and access for people to participate in this arena.
All right, well, seeing no questions, are there any members of the public who would like to comment on the proposed notice of inquiry? If so, please raise your hand using the raise hand feature on Zoom or *9 on your phone.
Sorry, I'm not seeing any hands
Likewise.
raised.
So to begin deliberations, we need a main motion before us. Do I have a motion to adopt the NOI?
So moved.
Mr. Bonfilio, motion. Do I have a second?
Seconded.
Mr. Nelson, seconded. I'll leave that main motion on the floor for any further discussion. Any additional discussion or questions from staff?
Just quickly, this is kind of a unique circumstance. DOER tends to participate in DPU proceedings, and I wonder, Andy, if it would make sense to abstain on this as if DOER were to provide comments.
I'd like to turn to our general counsel or Ms. Sharkey to answer that. That is a legal question, and I am not a lawyer.
I don't, so this is not the DPU, so it is not as if you are participating as a party here in this proceeding. There will be no parties in this proceeding. I think if this was an adjudicatory proceeding and you were a party, I think there would be at least an appearance of a conflict, while your agency is simply providing comment, and DEP may provide comment also. I don't think, I personally don't think that is a problem for you to vote on this NOI.
Okay, thank you. I'm not overly concerned about it. Just we did file comments in the DPU docket, so just wanted to have an attorney assess the situation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Always good to phone a lawyer instead of phoning a friend here. Okay. So I believe, unless there is any further discussion, we can take a roll call vote. Mr. Green?
Yes. Chair Nelson.
Yes.
Commissioner Frazier.
Yes.
Commissioner Woodcock.
Yes.
Deputy Commissioner Moran.
Yes.
General Counsel Costco.
Yes.
Mr. Bonfilio.
Yes.
Mr. Casey.
Yes.
Secretary Theoharidis.
Yes. So the motion, as prepared by EFSB staff, is unanimously approved. And with that vote, the siting board will now proceed to initiate the notice of inquiry as prepared by staff. Staff is hereby directed to prepare that notice. And again, we thank you for all your good work on that. And I will sign that once it's prepared. So before we adjourn, are there any other matters we need to discuss? Okay, well, I hope everyone stays cool and that the grid keeps functioning. It looks good. Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. Thank you, Mr. Woodcock. All those in favor?
Oh, we have to take a roll call vote. I'm not kidding.
No, okay. I think we have it here. The motion carries and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you to everyone for attending today's siting board meeting. We're off the record.
Have a good 4th of July, everybody.
Thank you. Happy
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.